This is microbiology, final lab exam, study notes from my beautiful wife. Starting with parasitic protozoa. Giardia lamblia at 1000x, also called beaver fever. Trophozoites have 4 pairs of flagella and 2 nuclei. Contracted by drinking water where beavers live. Cyst stage is what we ingest. Signs and symptoms are nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and extreme flatulence. Diagnose by O&P fecal sample. Plasmodium at 1000x. Malaria. A ring forms inside the red blood cells, contracted through the Anopheles mosquito. Signs and symptoms are fever that waxes and wanes, pain, and organ failure. Diagnose by microscopic blood sample. Trichomonas vaginalis, a sexually transmitted infection, has a flagella and an undulating membrane. Contracted by direct sexual contact from the toilet and through sharing towels. Signs and symptoms for women are greenish-yellow frothy discharge and fishy odor. Men are asymptomatic. Diagnosed by taking vaginal wash, swab, and microscopic exam. Moving on to platyhelminths or flatworms. Clonorchis sinensis at 40x, Chinese liver fluke. A very flat worm, hermaphroditic, has both an oral and ventral sucker. Contracted by ingestion of the cercaria in undercooked fish and crustaceans. Snails are the intermittent host. Signs and symptoms are hepatomegaly, gallbladder issues, DT, bile duct obstruction, nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. Diagnosed by fecal sample. Dipylidium caninum at 40x, a tapeworm, smooth flatworm with segments, from dogs and cats. Signs and symptoms are nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea, anorexia, dizziness and pain, abdominal pain, weakness, and desire for salty foods. Diagnosed by fecal sample. Schistosoma, cercariae. Male has a body groove where a female sits for copulation. Cercariae attaches to skin in water and penetrates through the hair follicle. Can migrate through tissue. Signs and symptoms are itchy skin, fever, chills, cough, and diarrhea. Diagnosed by O&P on sputum and fecal sample. Echinococcus granulosus at 40x. Kind of looks like a chicken. Hydatid cyst that can get as big as a basketball, can rupture, and will travel. Contracted by ingesting contaminated food. Signs and symptoms are nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, abdominal pain, anaphylaxis, if it ruptures. Affects the liver, lungs, and brain. Anemia, SOB, seizure, confusion, death. Check Perla. Diagnosed by CT or MRI. Moving on to nematodes or roundworms. Enterobius vermicularis at 40x. A pinworm, the #1 roundworm in the USA. Eggs can be found in dust. Females have a pointy tail, while the male stays in the rectum. Contracted by defecation and ingestion of eggs. Scratching, not washing hands, contracting eggs from a fomite, inhalation of eggs from dust. Female explodes at end of life cycle. Signs and symptoms are extreme anal itching that can interrupt sleep, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and abdominal pain. Diagnosed by O&P stool sample or sticky tape. Ascaris lumbricoides at 40x. Produces 200,000 eggs per day. Larvae can move through tissue, matures in lungs. Contracted by ingestion of eggs from water, food, or objects, fomites, placed in mouth. Signs and symptoms are shortness of breath, SOB, cough, nasal congestion, inflammatory response where the larvae are suffocation. Diagnose by O&P on stool or sputum, visualizing worms exiting mouth or anus. Necator americanus at 400x, hookworm. Cutting plates can move through tissue. 3 stages, cyst, larval, and worm. Penetrates skin when you walk barefoot in contaminated soil and moves through tissue. Signs and symptoms are itching at sight, inflammation of skin, the GI tract, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, wasting, pica, or anemia. Diagnosed by O&P sputum or stool sample. Granuloma will show up on MRI. Trichinella spiralis at 100x. More curly worm than the schistosoma. 3 stages, cyst, larvae, and worm. Ingestion of cyst in undercooked pork. Signs and symptoms are nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea, fever, swelling around eyes. Diagnosed with biopsy of tissue, ELISA test. Moving to parasitic arthropods. Pediculus humanus capitis at 100x. Head lice. Looks demonic. Live on host, uncommon in African Americans as they don't like black hair. Contracted by sharing hair ties or brushes and physical contact with an infected person. Signs and symptoms are itchy scalp, white eggs or nits on hair shaft. Diagnose with visual examination. Ixodes damini at 40x. It's a tick. Has 8 legs, is an arachnid. Attaches to your body and sucks blood. Contracted when you walk through wooded or grassland areas. Signs and symptoms are bullseye rash, swollen lymph nodes, can cause Lyme disease, borreliosis. Diagnosis by indirect fluorescent antibodies. Tinocephalides at 100x. It's a flea. It looks like a flea, has an angry beard. Contracted from domesticated cats and dogs, can also come from prairie dogs in Arizona, New Mexico, and California, and can carry the plague. Signs and symptoms are flu-like, fever, swollen lymph nodes, can lead to hemorrhaging tissue with the plague. Diagnosed by blood culture and rapid immune test. Mycology. Penicillium at 100x. It's pink, filamentous, or many, and coccus, just a few. Aspergillus at 100x is green-blue, filamentous, many, and several monotrichous cocci. Rhizopus at 100x. It's pink, looks like tiny mushrooms, and the most beautiful fungus Jess has ever seen. Candida albicans at 400x. Pink and purple cocci. Too numerous to count, and concentrated in the center of the sample. And thank you. Thank you, my love.